Do you remember DanicaPatrick? You know DanicaPatrick, the race car driver. She wasn't very good, but she also made those GoDaddy commercials, and they were very confusing to a young teenage mind. You know who I mean. Well, she has a podcast now where she explores spirituality, among other things. And some of her guests get a little out there, a little wild. None more so than Billy Carson. You know, Billy Carson! The guy who's like a black Alex Jones if Alex Jones had more mainstream appeal and was into crystals. Anyway, we're going to dive into that now.
So, have you seen the documentary movie called Zeitgeist?
Oh, Zeitgeist. You know Zeitgeist. Of course you remember Zeitgeist. Zeitgeist was that movie that all your atheist friends in 2007 watched and were convinced was going to shatter your faith.
Behold, when ye are entered into the city, there shall a man meet you, bearing a pitcher of water. Follow him into the house where he entereth in. This scripture is by far one of the most revealing of all the astrological references. The man bearing the pitcher of water is Aquarius, the water bearer.
Yeah, calling Zeitgeist a documentary is a bit like calling Jaws a documentary. You know, that's not really fair to Jaws. Jaws is at least based on a true story.
Where they base it, it was fascinating. The beginning is all about basically Jesus and the 12 apostles and dying and reborn 3 days later and the timing and everything. And they overlay it into more and more and more ancient times and how it's the same story over and over again. So is that an archetypal thing, or is that the same consciousness coming back over and over again and doing the same thing? Is that someone learning from the past? Why would that happen?
Folks, I speak a little bit of New Age and I can help you translate here. So first and foremost, she seemed to really enjoy the first third of the Zeitgeist movie. Based on what she says after that, I don't know that she actually finished the movie because they tie it all into this one world government conspiracy sort of thing. But she really sticks on the spiritual element of the whole thing. Well, she's asking, is this just a myth that's being repeated over and over again? Is this a same being essentially being reincarnated or reliving the same experience? Or are these different people going back and reliving these experiences, essentially recreating the past? Of course, the correct answer is none of the above, but we'll go ahead and let Billy answer here.
Yeah, so the story kept getting rewritten. The story did happen originally thousands of years before Jesus was even born.
Honestly, I have no idea if he's saying that this story simply was written down thousands of years before Jesus, or if the actual events of the story happened thousands of years before Jesus. It seems like this latter one is what he's really implying.
And then the story kept getting copied over and over and over. The true story of Jesus has really never truthfully fully been read.
So we run into a little conundrum here. If no one's read the true story of Jesus, then how can anyone know they haven't read the true story of Jesus? It's a bit like those stories when someone says, and no one has ever come back alive. And you wonder, well, if no one's come back alive, then who told you the story?
The Sinai Bible is probably closest to the truth, because the Sinai Bible was written before the King James Bible and some of the other canonized books.
So if you were unfamiliar with Billy Carson, or weren't really sure if he had any business talking about this stuff, or how great his knowledge was when it comes to the Bible and the biblical texts and going back into the historical textual criticism, this should provide your answer. This Sinai Bible is older than the King James Version. An English translation written 1400 years after the time of Jesus. And then he talks about other canonized books. He mentions that right in the same breath with the King James, as if the King James translation of the Bible is its own canonized book. Like, the guy has no idea what he's talking about, at all. And then he mentions this Sinai Bible, which I have to assume is Sinaiticus, which is a very ancient manuscript of the Bible and contains pretty much our Bible. It's missing a few books, and it has 3 editions across both the Old and the New Testament. The editions being the 4th book of Maccabees, which is actually present in the Eastern Orthodox canon, and the New Testament books being the Shepherd of Hermas and the Epistle of Barnabas, both of which were very popular books in the early church. They just were not eventually canonized. But you have access to both if you want to look at what they are, and the results will not shock you. And if nothing else, this manuscript makes a case for the Catholic or Orthodox canons of the Bible and not the Protestant.
And there's about 14,000 differences between the two. And one of the biggest discrepancies is Jesus was never crucified.
Sinaiticus has all 4 Gospels and the epistles, all of which speak of a crucified Christ. So maybe he's not talking about Sinaiticus, but if there is a Sinai Bible anywhere, I can't specifically find it. Let me know in the comments if you know what he might be talking about, but the historical text that you might call the Sinai Bible definitely has the crucifixion in it.
Matter of fact, Harvard has a copy of the Book of Jesus' Wife in its seminary library.
What?
So Harvard does have a tiny fragment of a manuscript, and when I say tiny fragment, I meant literally just a single piece inches across in which Jesus refers to his wife. No one knows what book this is from. No one knows how old it is. We have clues, but best guesses put it to several hundred years after Jesus. So, no, this little thing is not a mind-blowing, world-changing, hidden thing. It's very public. Scholars know about it. The public is able to know about it. It's really not that big of a deal or that big of a discovery. Like most things, it was just the media getting ahead of itself. He's about to paint this whole narrative about Jesus having a bloodline that continues to this day. This little fragment of a manuscript certainly does not indicate anything like that.
So most likely he got married, had kids, and the Merovingian bloodline most likely is still walking the planet till this very, very day.
I wonder if the extent of his reading into this is just the Da Vinci Code. I wonder if he read Jurassic Park and thinks that there's an island full of dinosaurs somewhere. The only references that I'm aware of that are not modern references to Jesus being married are old Gnostic texts, several hundred years older than the scriptures. And every instance of this that I have seen has a very Eurocentric approach to it, meaning that it was probably used to prop up ideas about European superiority.
And so I think that those stories of the ancient, the ancient cultures having that same story over and over again was just it being copied again from culture to culture and being reread, and the names being slightly changed, but it happened originally thousands of years prior with Horus.
So did the actual actions happen again, or it's just the story being rewritten over and over again?
Just the story being rewritten over and over again.
Oh, no. You don't get to have it both ways. You can't say the story of Jesus is just a rewritten story from thousands of years earlier, and then also try to say, well, the historical Jesus was never crucified and he went on to get married and have children. You can't have both.
With different names to the same exact tale. Yeah, just like if you read the Epic of Gilgamesh, you discover that's the true story of Noah's Ark in the Bible. They copied it from the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's not two separate stories. It's the same exact story being rewritten.
I doubt he's read the Epic of Gilgamesh and compared it to Genesis, because the flood part is just one chapter of the epic, and it has a very different focus than the book of Genesis. It has a different theme. Similar events do happen. So let's even say I'm a skeptic. I don't believe the Bible is true, and I think the Hebrews ripped off the story of Gilgamesh, and that's where the account of Noah's flood came from. And there's no possible way that this was an actual historical event, never mind a worldwide flood, but just a local flood that may have influenced both cultures. There is still a big so what factor. Because when you look at Genesis and compare it to any of the ancient Near East literature, you find the theme of Genesis acting as a polemic against them, or as an apologetic against them. Genesis 1 is a comparison of their God versus the pantheon of gods of the pagan tribes. Genesis, if it is a retelling of the story of Gilgamesh, it's taking the pagan elements and showing our God is the one sovereign over what's happening. This is a theme that we see throughout the book of Genesis. And so it really doesn't do anything for the narrative of Jesus.
So who was Jesus then? What is the story?
I believe that Jesus, his real name is Yeshua. First of all, he was a real person that did exist. I've been to the house where he grew up.
Joseph, you just said it's a fabrication, a retelling of an ancient thing that actually did happen, and that this story didn't happen. This guy's flip-flopped like 4 times in just a few minutes.
In Egypt, because if you remember in the Bible, Jesus disappears from the Bible at the age of 12.
Mm-hmm.
He disappears. You don't see him again until he's 32. He's gone. Where does he go? The gospel of the Holy 12, which was left out of the Bible, has the answer.
Okay, so more evidence this guy really has no idea what he's talking about. Because here, I'm not sure if he's talking about the gospel of the 12, which is a ancient lost gospel. We don't have it. There's no manuscripts in existence today that we know of. And it's only referenced one time by Origen as being a heretical book. So we have no idea what the book says. There's no indication that he talks about Jesus going to Egypt or anywhere else. Then there's the Gospel of the Holy 12, which was written in the late 1800s as a rewriting of Jesus as a vegetarian. And you can find the full script of that online, and there is no mention of Jesus going to Egypt as a child. I can't even accuse this guy of twisting existing resources. He just makes things up as he goes.
He goes to Egypt. I've been there. If you go to Coptic Cairo, you can go to the house where Jesus and his mother lived in there in that area, and they turned it into like a crypt now. So you can go there, you can see where the bed he slept in and everything is still there.
Ironically, the people who turned it into a crypt and a destination site would be the very same people that he's accusing of hiding things from you.
And he was learning the Egyptian mysteries.
What?
What?
Where does he get that? Is there any historical source that suggests that? Is there any modern source that would suggest that? And what are these Egyptian mysteries? And Jesus, who throughout the New Testament is presented as a devout Jew, is that something that he would go off and explore? And yes, I know we can't just argue from silence. However, we can pretty confidently say Jesus also didn't fly to the moon, camp out there, and then fly back for his 33rd birthday. The argument from silence is really only a fallacy when you don't see what you were expecting to see, as opposed to seeing things that are clearly made up and go against the historical documents that we actually do have.
From there, he went all the way up into Tibet to learn Reiki healing and Qigong, and that's been confirmed by the Dalai Lama.
Wow, there's a bit to unpack there, but I'll make it quick. First, which Dalai Lama confirmed this? How did he confirm this? Did he find some evidence that Jesus was in India? A text? An image? Something that would have suggested that a holy person from Israel was in India at this time period? If that evidence exists, it's certainly not forthcoming. But let's look at the documents that we do have about Jesus and see if it lines up with this narrative. 1. The way Jesus healed people was by his own authority, not through any religious practice, which looks completely different than Far Eastern religious practices of healing looked like. Then in the Gospels, people know who Jesus is. He's known as a Nazarene. He's known as the carpenter's son. He's known as the Son of Mary. People are aware of who he is. He wasn't some mysterious stranger who left as a child and came back to start his ministry. No, in fact, people are surprised when Jesus starts preaching because they're thinking, what is this guy from the sticks doing preaching, teaching, having disciples? No, this internal gospel evidence shows us that Jesus probably didn't do much more than work as a carpenter in Nazareth.
And then he left from there and went down into India to learn the mystic arts, teaching reincarnation all the way back to Egypt. And then the Bible picks up, I call my son out of Egypt. And then you see him appear on the back of a donkey in Jerusalem at the age of 32. And that's where the Bible text picks him back up as coming back in.
Has this guy even read the Bible? Jesus definitely did not teach reincarnation. Most definitely did not teach reincarnation. He taught an afterlife. He taught the kingdom of God. He did not teach anything like reincarnation. And the part where the Bible says that he called his son out of Egypt, well, that would be when Joseph took his family to Egypt to hide from Herod, and then God calls them back to Israel. And it doesn't just jump into Jesus being on the back of a donkey. You've missed 3 years of ministry. That's like in the last week of Jesus' life. This is as he goes into Jerusalem to be crucified. I have no idea how this guy can claim to know what's in the Gospels or how he knows the true story of Jesus.
But he was a very spiritual being. He was a virgin birth. And what's interesting is in the Apocrypha text, the text that was kept out of the Bible, you discover his grandmother, Mary's mother, was also a virgin birth.
No, neither St. Anne, the mother of Mary, nor Mary herself were born of virgins. The doctrine of the Immaculate Conception of Mary says that she was born without original sin, not that she was born of a virgin. And the apocryphal book that he's referring to is probably the Gospel of St. James, which does not say that she was born of a virgin.
And if you look at the Sumerian tablets, you discover that these virgin births were not unusual. They were experimenting in these types of in vitro fertilization techniques, where they would take an egg and put it in the womb and take it to term. Not their egg, another woman's egg.
Okay, so no, virgin births were not unheard of in the ancient world. There were different stories of various virgins giving birth. And I'm not going to go into how they are similar or different from the Christian narrative, because that's a little beyond what I'm trying to do here. But this in vitro fertilization nonsense? No, not possible. Did not happen in the ancient world, period. They did not experiment this way. And if there was anyone who did try to experiment like this, then infection, blood loss, shock would have killed anyone. People did not survive this sort of thing. The first recorded successful in vitro fertilization is in the 1880s on an animal. We've only been doing it on people in hospitals for about 50 years.
And they have this whole section in Egypt called the Hathor's temple at Dendera, where they have these birthing centers where they were doing this.
I've been there.
Yeah.
When you walk into Dendera, the first temple on the right, before the main temple, and then there's Isis's temple behind that.
Yes, that's it. Absolutely, yeah.
Well, they get that right. At least they said that was the birthing temple. They got that right.
Yeah.
Yep, you can fly over to Egypt and visit this exact temple today, and you have access to almost the entire thing. And the birth temple was in celebration of the birth of a particular god or goddess. It did not indicate a place where people would go to give birth, certainly not a place where they would experiment with in vitro fertilization. I would love this guy to give a source, any source at all, backing up anything that he's saying.
I think he's half human, half Atlantean. That's my personal opinion.
Hey, wait a minute. Am I being punked? Where's Ashton? Ashton!
So if they were placing an egg inside of a woman, it wasn't hers.
Right, correct. So he was a virgin birth, and so was his grandmother was also a virgin birth.
At this point, it would just be funny if he wasn't so dead serious about it. Maybe it is funny because he's so dead serious about it.
They were planted on this timeline for a specific reason by the people who control from behind the scenes, which were they called themselves the ordainers of destiny in the Sumerian tablets. They believed that they had the right to control destinies on this planet.
Ah, yes. Ancient Sumerian poetry, unrelated to ancient Egypt, definitely reveals who's really pulling the strings thousands of years later.
And they would use this crystal tablet to see potential outcomes and futures that they wanted, and they would then pick the one they wanted to coalesce into one real outcome, and they would go ahead putting action behind that to make that reality come true for them.
I'm not going to pretend like I've read these tablets or texts, but this guy for sure has not read those tablets. But Do these people like make this up whole cloth, or do they borrow from previous New Age conspiracy theorists? Although theorists is not a good word because that suggests there's actually some validity behind what you come up with. This is just straight up conspiracy fiction.
So was this bloodlines then? Were they playing with bloodlines and the inherent skills that these bloodlines or these inherent genetic advantages that they had? Was that what they were working with to create a superhuman?
Yeah, he's just making crap up, and she's not only going with it, she's like building on it. She's giving him new ideas. What about bloodlines and superhumans that come out of these bloodlines? You want to take a critical approach to these kind of crazy stories, or at least stories that sound pretty crazy? Get my book. In the book, Seeing the Light, I tackle the subject of near-death experiences and how Christians tend to use them when they're doing apologetics or trying to witness to other people. Can they be effective? Are they worth your time and effort? Should you delve deep into the world of these near-death experiences, seeing Jesus, seeing heaven, seeing hell? Click below, find out, buy the book.
You're exactly right. They had, prior to the flood, the Anunnaki, who are also the Atlanteans. That's the same people. The Atlantean is a civilization. Anunnaki means those who came from heaven to earth. So,
oh, he's into reptilian conspiracy theories. He should have just said that from the get-go. Never mind the fact that he's already mixed up ancient Egypt and ancient Mesopotamia a few times, which had very different belief systems, very different cultures, weren't really that connected at all, other than maybe fighting. Now he's just throwing in an ancient story from Plato, who lived hundreds if not thousands of years after these older cultures, and was telling a fictional allegory.
The initial pharaohs would be a direct bloodline of one of these Anunnaki people. In other words, it would be half human and half Anunnaki, where the term demigod comes from in Greek and Rome and all of that. And so they would make that liaison, that bloodline liaison between them and the people. As time continued to go by and cultures and the way that the economics and the civilizations and the kingship and everything changed.
Sorry, it had to be done.
They began to then, for whatever reason, handpick specific people to do specific things, and they would then create these genetically modified or bloodline people. Yeshua was one of them, who I believe he was half human and half Anunnaki. That's just my personal opinion. I have not read that anywhere, but that's based on what I've researched.
You haven't read it anywhere, but you researched it? How does that even make sense? But he's right. He hasn't read it anywhere because it doesn't exist. This is complete nonsense that he is just making up as he goes. Now, this interview is over an hour and a half long. That's all I can stand. That's all I can stand. And if you've stood it with me, then thank you. You're amazing. If you want to support, go down into the description, sign up for Patreon. Those of you who are already patrons, thank you so much. I couldn't do this without your support. And I especially thank you for your support during these slow periods. It's been a real hot summer, difficult to work. I'm also going back to school. So, again, thank you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time.